What's up everybody, welcome back. So in the last episode we set up our voting system for kicking and banning players. So we still need to make sure that everything works, and we also need to make sure that we can remove players from the kick and the ban list. So there's still plenty left to do, so let's just get started. One note, if you want to get the project files for yourself to download, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a Patreon, and then you will get access to premium channels and also a download for the project. So premium channels in the Discord, that is. So let's start today's videos and finish the kick and ban list. First, we need to make sure that we can save the kick list and the ban list. So we're going to use the GameInstance for that. The GameInstance is a kind of special class in the sense that it gets created when the game starts, and it persists throughout the entire game until the game is closed down. So we can save our kick list on the GameInstance, and then we can simply use that for a kick list that persists through each session. So we don't really need to save that on a save game or things like that. We do need to save our ban list, so we're going to save that on our save game, so we can simply store that and retrieve it when we open the game again later. So we're going to go to the save data folder and open the save game player profile, so we don't need to add it to the structure, we're simply going to add it to the actual save game. And in here we're going to add a variable, and this is going to be the permanent ban list, so perma ban list. And we're going to turn this into a string, and after that we're going to turn it into a map. And then a second variable appears over here, and we're going to change that one into a string as well. So now we can map two strings together, and we're going to use the unique net ID from Steam and then the name of the player as the second string. So we can identify each player and also have their name for in a menu. So that's saved on the player profile, so that's good to go. Now I want to create an interface that we're going to add to the GameInstance, so we can make calls from our session GameMode and session PlayerController. So let's go to the interfaces folder and in here create a new interface. So this is going to be my BPI shooter GameInstance, so GI. And we're going to add two functions in here for now. So let's name this BPI GI and then get kicked and banned players. Kicked and banned. Oh, really. So for this one, we need to give it two outputs, and both of them are going to be maps of strings. So the first one is the kick list. We're going to change it into a string over here, then turn it into a map and make sure the second variable is a string as well. And then create a, not an output, I'm sorry. Yeah, do create an, create another output. And that's the actual ban list. So I thought I was adding a key to the kick list, but I wasn't. So just simply add another output, ban list, and that's also a map of strings to strings. And then we're going to add a second function in here, and that's the BPI GI, and then add kicked player. So we can call this if we actually kicked or banned a player. And for this one, we're going to give it a few inputs. The first one is the unique net ID. So that's just a normal string. So we're going to turn it back into a single variable and then a string. The second one is the player name. So that's also a string. And the last one is a boolean, and that will tell us if the player is banned or simply kicked. So turn that one into a boolean. So those are the functions that we need in this interface. Now let's open up the actual game instance and do some setup in here. So as I mentioned, the game instance persists throughout the entire game. So when you start it, it gets created, and only when you close the game down, the game instance gets destroyed. So we can simply add a variable on the game instance, and that will persist throughout the entire game. So we're going to simply add our kick list variable to the game instance over here. Again, that's a map of strings to strings. So turn it into a map, and the second variable is a string again. And then we want to go to the create multiplayer session event. So this is the event that actually creates a new session if we host it. And at that point, we want to clear the kick list. So the kick list only persists throughout the session. And if you start a new session, then the kick list is cleared. So otherwise you need to ban players. So we can drag it in and then do clear. And then you have the clear node for a map in the same way as you have it for an array. So we can simply clear the kick list after we created the session. So now we also want to set up the interface in here that we just created. So we're going to go to the class settings and then implement an interface. That's our shooter game instance interface. And then we're going to set up the functions in here as well. So let's start with the get kicked and banned players over here. So we want to get the ban list from our save game. So first of all, let's grab our save game player profile and check if this is valid or not. It should be if we have a profile loaded, but let's just make sure. So plug it in over here. If it's not valid, we're going to load it. So then we're going to load a game from slot. And we can grab the slot name from our variables in here, the player profile slot. So we can store it in our variable for the save game. But we need to cast it because the load game doesn't know which game it's loading. So we need to cast it to our save game player profile. And then we can store it in our variable, like so. And if it already was valid, then we can simply grab the ban list from there. So we can grab a getter for the save game again and then get our ban list. So we can plug that into the return node and simply grab the kick list from our variables in here and plug that in as well. And then make sure we hook up both of the branches in here, like so. So this will simply return the current kick list and the current ban list from the save game. And then we also want to set up the add kicked player function. So let's double click this one as well. So this is actually an event. First of all, let's check if we want to ban or kick the player. So let's grab a branch and plug in our bool over here. So if we want to ban the player, then we're going to store it on the save game. So let's grab our save game player profile. At this point, it should definitely be valid. So we don't need to check in this case. We're going to get our ban list. And from here, we can add a key to it. So we're going to do add. And it's kind of the same thing as an array, only in this case, you're not using an integer as the first entry, but you're using a string, and the second one is a string as well. So all you need to do is make sure that the first string is always unique, otherwise it will simply overwrite the existing variable in the map. So for the unique one, we're going to grab the unique net ID, and the second one is the player name. So plug it in like so. And then we need to make sure that we save the save game after we changed it. So we're going to drag off and save game to slot. Plug it in over here and simply grab the player profile slot from the variables again, like so. And for the kick list, we simply want to add it to our kick list from the variables. So drag it in and add an entry as well. Hook this one up to the false pin and then plug in the unique net ID and the player name again. So this should be good to go as well. And now we want to take a look at setting it up in our session game mode and the session player control. We want to be able to use some of these code in the lobby and in game. So we're going to use it from the lobby if a server wants to kick or ban a player, but also if players join a game in progress, then we're going to check the kick and the ban list, and if they are not allowed in the game, then we're going to disconnect them again. So because we want to use it from both of our game modes, we can add it to our session game mode, which is the parent of both of our game modes. So then we have access to it from both scenarios. So we're going to go to the session game mode. And in here, first of all, let's add the variables for the kick list and the ban list, so we can simply access them from here. So we're going to create a new variable, and that's going to be the session kick list. So that's our map again of strings to strings. So let's set it up with a string to string mapping. And the second one is our ban list. So that's our permanent ban list. And again, that's a map of string to strings. So that should be good. Now in here, what I want to do is also create an array of player controllers that connects to our game mode. So we're going to add our event handle starting new player in here as well. So let's right click and do event handle starting new player. And in this case, we're not going to cast it to any class. We simply want a reference to a controller. So we're going to promote this to a variable, and let's call this all controllers. And then we can turn it into an array and simply add the connecting controller to it. So let's add an item and plug in the new controller. And we do need to make sure that if a player logs out, we also remove the controller. So let's look for event on logout. And this one actually returns a controller instead of a player controller. So we do need to cast this to a normal player controller class. And then we can remove it from the array again. So get all the controllers and remove an item. So hook it up to the cast succeeded and then plug in the item. So now we have an array in here in the same way that we have on both of our other game modes, and we can simply access it from the session game mode. And on begin play, and we already had that in here, we're going to get the kick list and the ban list from our game instance. So we are the host, and the game instance, well, it actually exists for every local player. But if we're the host, we can simply access it from our game mode, for example, because then we know we are server side. So let's get the game instance. And we have our interface on here, so we can simply call our get kicked and banned players. And that's the message function, indicated by the little envelope over here. And then we can store them in the variables that we created. So let's set our permanent ban list and our kick list. Like so. So on begin play, we have those stored. And now we want to set up two functions in here. So let's create a new function. The first one is check kick and ban list. Kick and ban list. So we can call this function to check if a player is on the kick list or on the ban list. So we're going to give this two outputs, and those are booleans. The first one is on ban list, and the second one is on kick list. So now we simply want to check if the player is on the kick list. We do actually need an input, by the way, so that's the controller reference of the player. And that's actually a player controller. So let's turn it into a normal player controller. And then from the controller, we can drag off and get the unique net ID. So this only works if we are actually connected to Steam. And from the net ID, we can turn it into string. So net ID to string. And then we're going to save this in a local variable. So promote to local variable, local player ID, for example. And then we also want to get the player name. So if we drag off the net ID over here, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm confused with the other function. We're going to make it a little bit. For now, we simply want to grab our permanent band list from the variables, drag off the mapping, and we're going to find an entry. So we want to look for the unique net ID, so we can plug it in and then hook the find node up to a boolean, so it returns true if it found the key, and otherwise it returns false. So if we are on the band list, then we are found in this node, so we can grab a return node from here, return node, and simply enable the is on band list boolean like so. And we're going to grab a second return node, hook it up to the false pin, and then we can grab our session kick list, and from here also do a find and simply plug in our local player ID and plug this bool straight into the return node, so into the kick list variable, and then make sure the band list is false, so otherwise we are going to run into trouble. So that's all we need to do in here. And then we're going to create a second function we can call if we actually want to kick a player. So let's create another function called as kick player. And for this one, we're going to give it two inputs. And the first one is a permanent ban. So perma ban. That's a bool. And the second one is the index of the player that we want to kick. So simply index, and that's an integer. Now over here, we want to grab all of our player controllers, and we're going to get a copy of the index of the player that we want to kick or ban. Then from here, we can get the unique net ID of that player again. And so we're going to store this as a string into a variable. So first of all, let's turn it into a string, and then again promote it to a local variable. So local player ID, and store that first. Then we want to get the player name, as I mentioned in the previous function. So we can drag off the unique net ID and then get the Steam persona name. So that's simply the name of the player on Steam. So we're going to promote this to a variable as well. Local variable, local player name. Like so. So now we need to know if we want to kick or ban the player. So let's hook up a branch and simply grab it from the input of the function over here, the permaban boolean. And then we want to get our game instance. So let's get the game instance, and we're going to use the interface on there again. So drag off the game instance, and we're going to add a kicked player, the message function. So for the true pin, then we actually want to ban him. So we're going to enable the banned boolean and simply plug in our local variables. So the player ID and the player name. And we can actually do the same thing for the false branch, only in this case we want to disable the banned boolean. So plug it in over here and again plug in the local variables. So the target is the game instance. Make sure you hook that one up as well. And then we also want to add them to the ban list or the kick list on the current game mode. So we can simply do it directly in this function. So let's grab our permanent ban list for the upper branch, and we're going to add an entry, plug it in, and again plug in the local variables. So the unique net ID is the first pin and the player name is the second pin. So the first pin is the key and the second pin is the value. And do the same thing for the kick list. So the session kick list for the other branch. And in here we're going to add an entry as well. And plug in the ID and the player name. So we can call this function if we are the host and we actually want to add a player to the kick or the ban list. So we want to expand this a little bit later, but for now this is going to be it. Now we need to do a bit more setup in our widgets. So let's go to our widget folder and start in our lobby menu. So we want to go to the graph, and in here we need to set up the buttons for the kick, cancel, and kick accept. So over here, the little pop-up, the cancel and the accept button, we're going to set up those. So if we look over here, that should be button kick accept over here. We're going to add an on-clicked event, and kick cancel, and add an on-clicked event as well. So let's start with cancel over here. We're going to get all of our player name widgets from the variables. And in here, we're going to get a copy. And we actually have that index stored in our host player to kick integer. So we're going to plug that in over here. So we set this up in the previous video. When the host selects a player from the list, then this variable will be populated with the correct index of the player. So now we can drag off this, and we're going to set the vote button style. So we clicked cancel, so we want to make sure that the text goes back from red to white again. So is vote true is going to be false. Then we want to grab the border for the pop-up. So border pop-up kick player, and we're simply going to set the visibility to hidden. So set visibility and hide it again. And then we have disabled all the other buttons in our lobby using the disable lobby function over here. So we can drag it in and simply enable it again by enabling the bool. So that's all we need to do for cancel. And if we want to accept, so if we actually want to kick the player that we have selected, then we want to get our game instance. And again, we know we are server side, otherwise these buttons will not exist in our lobby. And because we are on a widget, we are on the local instance of the player, so we can actually access the game instance from here. That shouldn't be an issue. We do need to cast this, so we're going to cast it to our session game mode. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't want to get the game instance, we want to get the game mode. But the same rule applies over there. Because we are the server, we can do that from here. And we do want to cast it to our session game mode, as I mentioned. Over here. And then we can call our kick player function that we just created. So kick player. For the permanent ban, we can grab the value of the checkbox in here that we added. So we can simply grab the checkbox permanent ban from the variables. Checkbox ban. If we drag it in, we can get is checked. So that gets the current state of the checkbox, and simply plug it into the permaban bool. And the integer is the player host to kick, or host player to kick. So we can grab that from the variables as well and plug it in. And after we called the kick function, we actually want to do the same thing as if we press cancel. So we want to make sure the vote button turns white again, the pop-up disappears, and the lobby gets re-enabled. So simply hook it up over here as well. So that should be the confirm and the cancel button setup. Now let's continue doing a bit of widget stuff. So let's close this one down and let's go to the friends only widget. So we're simply gonna change this up a little bit so we can reuse it in case a player has been kicked or banned. So we don't need to actually create another widget for all of those. So first of all, let's make a few small changes in the designer. We have the text over here as the title or the header. So I'm going to turn this into a variable. So let's give it a name first, the text header, and make sure it's a variable. And then on here, the text that tells the player why he's banned, I'm also going to turn that one into a variable. So let's call this the reason, for example, turn it into a variable, and I'm also going to align it to the center. So justification over here, set it to centered. I think it looks a little bit better, whatever you prefer. So that should be the designer part. Then we want to go to the graph. And in here, we're going to add 3 booleans. And we're going to make sure that all 3 of those are instance editable and exposed on spawn. And the first one is going to be is private game. So let's turn it instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then we can duplicate it. So we also want a bool for is banned. And the last one is kicked. So again, all 3 instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then we can add our event construct in here and simply check the bools to make sure that we display the correct information. So let's grab a branch. And first let's check if this is displayed because it's a private game. So if that's true, then I'm going to grab the text header and set the text over here. So plug that into the true pin. And then the text is simply going to say private server like it does right now. So I can copy it and paste it over here. And we're also going to set the text for the reason. So let's grab the text reason as well and grab a set text node. And for this one, we can copy and paste it as well from the current reason. So that's because it's a private game. Copy and paste it in here. There we go. And simply do the same thing for the other bools. So we can copy and paste these nodes 2 more times. So if we simply hook this one up to the false pin and then this one as well. For the second one, we're going to check our banned boolean. And for the last one, we're going to check our kicked boolean. So for banned, we can make the header something like banned from server. And then we're going to change the text as well. So you have been banned, you will be disconnected. Over here. And then for the kicked one, we can do a similar thing. So kicked from server. Oop. And then say over here, you have been kicked, you will be disconnected. Like so. So now we can simply set the bool when we create the widget, and that will make it appear the way we want to. So that's the widget done as well. Let's go to our session controller and make sure that we set this up. So if we go to the framework folder and open the session controller, then in here we have the event private server disconnect. So over here we're actually creating the friends only widget. So we want to refresh this node. Then we get our booleans. So we're simply going to pass them on to the event. Like so. So we can set them from the game mode when we call this event. So that's good to go as well. So at this point we actually want to tie a lot of stuff together. So we're going to go through the game modes and the player controllers and set up the last few things. So let's start in our menu controller. So this is something left from the previous episode. In here we want to go inside the UI show lobby menu event or function. We added the isLAN connection exposed variable, so we want to pass this on to the function over here. And then we want to go to the event graph, and in here we have the replicated event that actually creates the widget. So create lobby menu, and that calls the function. So over here we also want to pass on the boolean to the create lobby menu event. So we can simply set it from the game mode where we called this. So this was left over from the previous episode. Save it, and that should be good to go. Now we can go into our menu game mode, and first of all let's make sure we set the bool that we just created. So let's go to the event graph, and we can actually do that over here. Event start game for controller. So over here we call our create lobby menu, and we can make sure we set the correct boolean by using the option string. So let's right click and get the option string from the game mode. And from here we can parse an option, so parse option. And then our option we can use is our B is LAN match. So that's actually the boolean that is used by default by the actual online subsystem. So over here in the create session node, we added this a long time ago. So B is LAN match. We can copy this one and simply check if this is true or not. So if this one is true, then we are playing on a LAN connection. So what we can do, for example, is drag off this boolean and then use a select node. And we can turn our string into an integer. So to integer, string to int. Plug it in over here. And then if this is 0, then it's false. And if it's 1, it's true. So simply enable it over here. So this will populate our LAN connection boolean. Then we want to make sure that we go to our event handle starting new player. And all the way at the end over here, we have the call to the private server disconnect. So in here, we also added the booleans. And for this one, we want to make sure we enable the is private game. So this one gets called if the player is not a friend and he's trying to join a friends only game. So that's set up and good to go. Then what we also want to do in here is check all the players that are actually connecting to the lobby if they're not already kicked or banned from this session. So we can do that over here in the event handle starting new player at the beginning. So let's make sure we do it after the cast for the menu controller, but before we actually add them to the arrays over here. So let's make some room right after the cast. And in here we can call our check, kicked and ban list because we created that on the parent of this game mode. So we can simply call check, kick and ban list over here, plug it in. So the controller can simply be the menu controller. We don't need to cast it. Then we can grab a branch over here to check if any of these pools are true. So let's grab an OR node and plug in both of the booleans. Plug this one into the condition. And if any of these are true, then we can call our private server disconnect again. So that's actually on the controller. So we want to drag off the cast to controller and then call private server disconnect. Hook this one up to true pin. And we can simply plug in the variables like so. So it's not a private game, and the way we set it up in the widget, if this is true, then it will not check the kicked boolean, so this will make sure it works. And if this is false, then we can simply continue like we used to. So we want to plug this one back into the add node for the arrays. Okay, that's good to go. Now we added the event handle starting new player and event on logout to the parent of this game mode. So we want to make sure that if we don't add a call to the parent function in this child, then this will override the parent function. So the parent function will not be called. So we want to make sure that the parent function also executes. So we're going to right click on the event handle starting new player and add a call to parent function. And then simply plug that in first thing we're going to do. And also pass on the player controller. So we did handle starting new player and we also want to do event on logout. So that should be in here as well somewhere. Event on logout. Again, in here right click and add a call to the parent function. And hook everything up. So that should be good to go. Now there is one important thing left in here to add, and that is if a player leaves, then we want to make sure that we remove the actual vote counts of those players from the current votes. So if a player voted and that player gets kicked, then the votes that he casted needs to be removed as well, otherwise all of the counts will be messed up. So what we want to do is actually go to our update lobby event first. And in here, we're going to add another boolean, and with that boolean, we can simply update the myVotes array instead of the kickvote counts. So let's plug in a new condition over here, and that's going to be the player votes. And again, for this one, we want to make sure that we add it before the update kickvotes. So before kickvotes, and then that one needs to be before the player names. So make sure you add it right in front here. So we can grab the current execution pin from the previous branch and just move it over. So this one comes straight from the for each loop, the loop body, plug that one into the first branch. And in here, we want to update the lobby myVotes. So for this one, we actually have an event on our player controller. So that's the array element over here. Drag off and call update myVotes. Didn't we actually create that? I think we did. Let's look for votes. Oh, I actually misspelled that, obviously. So update myVotes on the player controller, that should be in here. If that's true, we want to call it, then continue to the branch for the kickvote counts. And if it's false, we're simply going to continue without updating myVotes, and we're going to check the kickvote counts. Then over here, we don't want to update the buttons, so we're going to disable that one. And to get the correct counts, we can grab our player kickvotes array of structures and simply get a copy. So we're going to get the copy of the index from the for each loop over here, plug it in, and then we can break the entry, and that will give us the array of booleans. So hook that up over here. So now that we have this call inside of the update lobby menu, we want to go to our event logout and actually update that one. So back to event on logout, this is where we actually remove the entries from the player ready array, and in here we're also going to remove the votes from the player that leaves. And we want to create a function for that. So let's create a function inside of our GameMode. Remove player votes. And we're going to give it an index as an input. So let's simply call this index and turn it into an integer. So in here, we want to get our player kickvotes array, and we want to get the copy of the correct index first. So like so. From here, we can get the array if we break the structure. Then we're going to loop through this array. So let's grab a for each loop and hook it up directly. And we simply want to make sure that for each entry that is true, we are going to subtract one vote. So we can hook up a branch to this loop body, check the current value of that entry in the array, so the current vote for that player, and grab our kickvote count array, get the corresponding index from this array, so that's the array index from the for each loop. And if this vote was true, this player is leaving, so we want to remove this vote. So then we can simply subtract this value. And to do that, we are actually better off getting a reference instead of a copy. So let's get a reference. And because we have a reference, we can simply subtract over here. So decrement integer, and we don't need to worry about resaving the array because this is a reference. Okay, so that's good to go. And then after we completed this loop, so after we removed all of the votes, we're gonna go through our player kickvotes array. So let's grab this array and also hook it up to a for each loop. So this is going to be connected to the completed pin of the previous one. And in here, we want to remove the votes from the player that left. So it's actually a bit easier to promote this to a local variable. So let's break this structure and then promote the actual array to a local variable. So that's the local votes array, for example. And then in here we can remove an index. So let's hook this one up to the loop body. From here we're gonna drag off this one and remove an index. And we want to remove the index of the player that left. So that's the one that actually comes from the input of the function here. So don't hook up the array index from the for each loop, but grab this one from the function. That's really important. And after that, we want to update the actual player kick votes array. So we can drag in the array of structures again and set an array element. So we need to do this for each player. That's why we're hooking this up to a for each loop and actually setting each index again. So we can simply grab this index from the for each loop. And then we want to store our local votes array. So we can drag that in over here and then make it a player kick votes struct. So that's easier by dragging off the actual item and then click the make one over here. Plug in the array, and that should be good to go. Size to fit should not be needed because we're not adding any entries. Okay, so this will make sure that for each kick vote array, the player that left will be removed, and after that the array will be updated again. So that's good to go as well. Now we can go back to the event graph and make sure that we actually call this. So we want to do this somewhere over here. It doesn't really matter too much. Well, yeah, it does matter. By the way, we want to make sure we do it before we remove the index from the kick vote count and the player kick votes array. Otherwise, we are messing things up. So let's disconnect the old team IDs, and over here we're going to call our remove player votes function. Plug it in. And then grab the index from the find node over here. That should be good to go. And then we want to go to the end over here and make sure that we enable our kick votes and also our player votes bool. So those will be updated if a player leaves. Okay, so that should make it work for leaving players. Now we want to go into our shooter game mode and tie some loose ends up in there as well. So let's open up the shooter game mode. And in here we actually want to make sure that we check the players that enter the game if they are on the kick of the ban or the ban list. So like we did previously. And we also want to make sure that inside of the event handle starting new player, where we already have the call for the private server disconnect, we want to enable the boolean for is private game. So let's do that one first. Enable the bool, private server disconnect. Then we can go to the beginning of the function over here. And we can actually do it after this boolean. So after the game started. So all the players that enter the game from the lobby, they have been checked already, so they should be valid entering this game. We're only going to check new players that enter if the game already is in progress. So let's move this one over a little bit to the left. And then in here we can simply call our check, kick and ban list function again. So let's right click and call check, kick and ban list. So this one goes into the true pin if the game started. Grab the controller from the cast node over here. And then do the same thing as in the previous game mode. So we can grab a branch in here and check if any of these bools are true. So let's grab an OR node. Plug in both of them. And that's our condition. If this is false, we can continue to the session friends only bool, and if this is true, then we want to call our private server disconnect again, and that's actually on the controller. So let's drag off the controller and then private server disconnect, and simply plug in the bools from the function call over here. So the banned and the kicked boolean. So this will make sure the players cannot enter the game if they are kicked or banned. And then in here we also need to add the calls to our parent function for the event handle starting new player. So let's right click, add a call to parent function, and then hook it up over here and pass on the controller. And we need to do the same thing for the event on logout. So let's look for that one as well. Oh, that's over here. So event on logout. And again, we want to add a call to the parent function and call that first before we do anything else. Okay, so those should be tied together. And now I think there's only one small thing left inside of the session game mode. So let's go back to our session game mode again. And in here for the kick player, after we kick the player, we also want to call our private server disconnect. And we can actually do that from the controller over here. So let's grab the controller reference. And to make sure we can call it, we do need to cast it to our session controller. So cast to session controller, I'm going to convert it to a pure cast. And then simply call private server disconnect. And we can hook it up like so. Then grab the band boolean from the input of the function. And we can simply enable kicked as well. So that will only be checked if band is false. So this should work fine. Compile and save this as well. And I think we should be good to go to actually ban or kick a player, and that should work in game. So we can run a little test in a minute, and then we only need to make sure that we can also remove players from our kick and ban list. So I think we're going to do that in a second episode, simply because it's still kind of plenty of work to do. Okay, so let's run a little test. So in the previous episode, we were kind of able to test in the editor, and for this one, we need to be able to be online. So we need to be connected to Steam, otherwise we don't have our unique net ID assigned, so we won't be able to find players on our kick or ban lists. So we actually need to be connected to Steam for this to work. So I packaged the game, I'm running it on 2 computers right now, and I'm joining a session. So I decided I'm going to show it from the client side this time. So currently I'm a client and I can only cast votes, but we only have 2 players in here, so that doesn't really make any sense. But I can kick myself from the other computer, so that's what I'm going to do first. I'm simply going to kick and not ban me. So let's execute that. You cannot see what I'm doing, but I'm kicked, so I will get this message. I'm back in the main menu, and right now if I want to reconnect to the session, I should not be able to, so I can search a game and try and join it. And then I'm notified I'm still kicked from the server, so I cannot join the game. Now on my other PC, I'm gonna go back to the main menu, so the session is ended, and now I'm gonna host a session again. So we have a new session. And this time I should be removed from the kick list. So we're going to check if that's working. So I'm creating a session right now and I'm going to search it over here. So this is GameDev Raw 2. It's a new session and I'm going to try and connect to that again. And this time it's working. So closing a session actually resets the kick list. That's good. And now let's ban myself as well. So let's see if that one is working. I'm actually banning myself on the other PC. There we go. Banned from server. So now on my second PC, I'm going to close the game down entirely. So quit game. Again, I'm sorry you cannot see what I'm doing, but you just have to go with it. So I'm relaunching the game and then I'm going to host a session again. And now I should not be able to join this session because I have been banned from this server. So let's make sure that's working as well. Session is hosted and we're going to search for it over here. So GameDev Raw 3. Let's try and connect. And that's actually not working. So that's, well, it is working, but I cannot connect. So that's good. So this part should be good to go, and now the only problem is we cannot remove players from our ban list, so that's kind of an issue. And we're going to take a look at that in the next episode. So we're going to add a tab to our friends menu where we can see the kick and the ban list, and then be able to remove players from there. Okay, so hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys and girls. Bye bye.